Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two very special guests. I have one, James Day. He's going to co-host with me. I came to mind when I was setting up this discussion with Charlotte Dennett, somebody who I've talked to a couple years ago. We did two episodes back to back, about 4 weeks apart. But her publicist sent me an email. I was like, I meant to have her back for a second go at this book, which you'll see the full title of it if you're watching this on Rockfin, Rumble, or X, Twitter. The full title is "Thy Will Be Done: The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller, and Evangelism in the Age of Oil," and it's part of a series called The Forbidden Bookshelf, edited by Mark Crispin Miller, amongst other great books. But she co-wrote this with Gerard Coley, who couldn't make it today. But this is an important book. It's very well researched. Like, it's almost like an encyclopedia of this thing. But the reason James Day came to mind was we had just done an interview with Richard DeSocio on the book Clash of Dynasties. Full title is Why Governor Nelson Rockefeller Killed JFK, RFK, and Ordered the Watergate Break-In to End the Presidential Hopes of Ted Kennedy. And so I just thought it overlapped too. And also James has done work on the bishops and evangelism. So I asked him to co-host, and he agreed. So I'm glad he's here. But Charlotte and I, going back to her other book, her most recent book is titled Follow the Pipelines, Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. And we did that interview in May 2022. But we're going to kind of just go over stuff and kind of apply some of the information in this book to current events, evangelism now that Trump's back, and also what's going on in the Middle East. So welcome both James Day and Charlotte Dennett. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
For people maybe who didn't hear our earlier interview, Charlotte, that was a couple of years ago now, maybe you can talk about yourself, talk about your books, and then we can get into some questions and current events and talk about That Will Be Done, please.
Well, I was a journalist in the Middle East, in Beirut during the mid-'70s. I was born in Beirut, and long story short, my father, America's first master spy, died in a mysterious plane crash when I was 6 weeks old after he made a top secret visit to Saudi Arabia. So after his death, my family, my mother and 3 kids, moved back to the States. I grew up in Massachusetts, but I went back to Lebanon in 63 to 65, and then later in the mid-'70s when I became a journalist there. And that's when I began to develop an interest into the subject of oil, because if you live in the Middle East, it's inescapable. Everyone knows that oil is the most sought after, coveted resource in the world. It continues to be. And the primary reason is it continues to be the fuel of the military. But that's also the reason why you don't hear about it much. When you hear current events covered on mainstream media and even non-mainstream media, that angle doesn't come through. I suppose it's because it's considered national security. But so anyway, I was a refugee from the Lebanese Civil War that went on from 75 to 90, killing 100,000 people, I might say. And I came back to New York City, where I ended up meeting my future husband in New York. And at the time, I felt I really couldn't write the truth about the Middle East. It was so heavily censored. I told him the Middle East is the most censored part of the world. And I just had to do something else. He had this idea of going off to the Amazon, of all places, and to investigate what the role was of an American evangelical missionary organization. It was called the Wycliffe Bible Translators in the U.S., and it had a very sophisticated secular name for its work in Latin America, and that was on purpose, by the way. The Summer Institute of Linguistics. In fact, these evangelical missionaries were able to penetrate Catholic Latin America by emphasizing that they were helping indigenous peoples understand and read their own native languages, and that the way to do that would be to translate their works into their foreign tongues. But the way they did that was through the New Testament. So it was sort of a underhanded way of getting the New Testament into the hands of indigenous people by having it written in their native language, and then they used this to influence local governments that needed some kind of exploitation of their interiors, and the Amazon covers a number of countries. It's not just Brazil. And so anyway, excuse me, yeah. So anyway, that's what happened. My husband's in the background here.
Right. Just for people who are watching this, this is the website. It's still in an organization, SIL Global. So it's the Summer Institute of Linguistics, and there it is. And they have bios of the people you talk about in your book, so you kind of can see their background.
Yeah. In fact, we updated our book. It came out in '94. We've since updated it. It's now available as an ebook. And what we found out since we updated it is that they have spread all over the world. It had been our hope that by exposing their relationship to giant corporations and the CIA, that would put an end to them. But unfortunately, it just didn't, apparently. Well, the book was suppressed. That was one reason. That's why it's part of the forbidden bookshelf. It got rescued as an ebook. And what it is really an expose of Nelson Rockefeller's whole giant empire in Latin America. And he had a particular focus on the Amazon. He called it his shining dream of developing the Amazon. So what we found out is that these evangelical missionaries would enter certain tribes and develop relations with them, and they essentially pacified the indigenous people, tried to win them over to American way of life and capitalism and so on. And that way, they would not oppose incursions onto their land. And that phenomenon was just a replication of what had happened, for instance, in the conquest of the American West. If you want to go into a territory where there are native populations living, you need to know whether they're going to be friendly or hostile. That's the way it worked. You send in the scouts, you send in the missionaries. And if the missionaries are not able to pacify the indigenous people, then you take more serious measures. And what we found, again, same thing has happened in the West, same thing has happened in the Amazon among indigenous tribes, namely dropping candy laced with arsenic along riverbanks, and also blankets with smallpox on them. And if worse comes to worse, you'd even send in the military. So, excuse me, Jerry, please be quiet.
So, and you taught me the word last time that I hadn't heard before, privishing, right? Where these books, including your husband's book on the DuPonts, are purchased like by HarperCollins or whatever, and then put in the back room, let dust cover them, and not publicized or anything. Yeah. So it's very
privishing.
Kind of, privishing, yeah.
Well, we discovered that actually that was with his book on the DuPonts. Another huge book.
Whatever happened to that? Where is it? Is it still extant?
It's available. It's part of the hidden bookshelf series. It's also an ebook. But yeah, we discovered that books that were critical of corporations often didn't sell very much, and we sued DuPont and Prentice Hall, his publisher, for suppressing his book. And in the process, I was going around to all these different publishing houses that had published books on corporations. This would be in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And I found a editor who said to us, well, there's a word for that. It's privishing. To publish a book privately so it sinks without a trace. Most authors have no idea this has happened to their books. But the whole idea is you go through the legal process of publishing the book. Okay, so it comes out. But then what you do, if you start hearing complaints about the book, or if the book is a dud and you want to cut your losses, either way, what you do is you pull out all the life supports of the book. You cancel the promotion, no more book tours, no more paperback, and so the book dies without any publicity. The book dies. That is privishing, and we got some press on that. We even went to court over this lawsuit, and so it was out there, but it's still, most people don't know about privishing. I think it probably exists to this day.
It probably does in the context. Now people can find a way around with self-publishing. It didn't exist back then. Now it's
Yeah,
much
but
easier.
self-publishing is rough, I mean,
I can attest to that.
oh God, self-publishing is rough. Going with a small publisher is rough. Because I went with a small publisher on my book, Follow the Pipelines, because I trusted the publisher. I didn't think she would suppress the book. But the problem is small publishers don't have the wherewithal to promote the way the big publishers do. And even now, big publishers don't promote the way they used to. They take on celebrities. That's their surefire audience. And the rest of us really struggle to get our books out there and to get them known, which is why you're having me on your show, because I would have to hire a publicist to, get my book known than to get on your show, which I'm grateful to be here. But I'm just saying the life of writers is really difficult. And my husband became the president of the National Writers Union to try to improve conditions. And we quickly learned that the publishing industry is very powerful. And one of the last great industries that's not organized, there's no unions, said, writers have very little rights.
And
but
they
still
always
we have
get,
to write.
when I was marketing my book, some of the offers they made me blush. They were like a loan shark or something. Like, you get 5% of net, like nothing. Like,
Yeah.
we'll take your book and you can just have a penny or two, like, for things. Like, literally, they looked at me with a straight face, and I was like, what?
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, no, it was unbelievable.
It used to be you got a decent advance. Like for Thy Will Be Done, we got an $85,000 advance.
Wow.
Now that was, but the book took us 18 years to get to write and research. So, the whole idea is you're supposed to get a good advance so it can support your writing. But instead, now the big advances go to the people who don't need the money, the celebrities. Anyway, so it goes.
Right. I mean, it's part of the book. It's part of your story, and part of that story is these books that are important to the public, for the public to know, are not known and suppressed and taken off of shelves and things like that. It's really something else. A lot of people wouldn't believe it. Yeah. So you've been in the Middle East. This book got published. It's got republished right now. Mark Crispin Miller. And it's still kind of a timely thing. This kind of like hunt for resources and land has morphed, but it's still going on just like it did under Thy Will Be Done, right?
Yeah, it's still going on. And when we published Thy Will Be Done, we warned people in the United States that the evangelical movement in Latin America was becoming very powerful. Because connections were made with local governments, and it was sort of a symbiotic relationship. The missionaries go out. In this case, the Summer Institute of Linguistics actually provided a maps to show where hostiles were, where the hostile Indians were, which helped the large corporations, whether they be oil companies or ranching or agribusiness, So there was a symbiotic relationship, and the powerful relations developed. And then it started happening in our own country. And of course, now look at where we are. We had under the first Trump administration a vice president who was an evangelical. And in a huge part of Trump's base are evangelicals. So it continues, and it's going on all over the world.
Yeah.
They're
Charlotte, if I can jump in here and just kind of clarify. So, with the idea of, let's say, the Wycliffe Bible translators coming in, what would they can't just assume to drop off Bibles and walk away. So, what would be their kind of MO in terms of follow-up then? Who would kind of come up on their heels to sort of, reap what was planted with the Bibles being delivered,
Well, I mean, it was worked out with the native governments. I mean, the whole point was that the whether it was the Colombian government or the Brazilian government, they needed penetration of their interiors. The missionaries are going to be the ones to do it, but they were Protestant. So the missionaries sort of disguised their work as being linguistic and helpful to the indigenous to rediscover their own language. So there was cooperation. The government supported these Bibles getting into the translated Bibles getting into the hands of the indigenous people. I mean, it all worked out. That's how it happened.
Okay.
And it's the indigenous people who are the victims of this genocide too, right? So it's not the kind of European ancestry. So all these things where you hear about in Guatemala or El Salvador, it's an ethnic conflict, right? A lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And it sowed divisions within the tribes as well, because those leaders in their respective tribes that agreed to this arrangement and were encouraged, they were given perks, like developing small businesses and little small time farming and so on. You began to see sort of class divisions within the indigenous tribes as well, which was not particularly helpful. But at any rate, that's how it works.
Right, and it's still now. And you said, I think you quoted in your book, like they were trying to get 2,000 indigenous languages or something. Like it's cool, right? It's not
2,000 tongues to go, as it's called.
Yeah, 2,000 tongues to go. That's right. And they actually have that on their website now. It's incredible. They have 4,000 employees right now.
Yeah, there it is. You've got it right there.
Yeah,
they have a big base in Waxhaw, North Carolina, for one thing. That's where their jungle aviation center is, where all their airplanes. They have a fleet of airplanes, and they have very sophisticated computers now that they take into the tribes for transcribing their languages. So they're technologically very sophisticated.
Interesting. And what's it like for them as people of a Protestant tent, I guess, in these traditionally Catholic countries, all the way from Mexico all the way to the tip of Argentina? Did they ever have any conflicts or problems with kind of Catholic locals?
Well, they had conflicts, not so much, I think, between Catholics and Protestants, but in some countries, anthropologists were becoming alarmed that these American foreigners were going way out in remote areas where even the nationals, were not going. And so a suspicion arose. They began, because of their sophisticated, their airplanes and their computers and their radio towers, they were suspected of being affiliated with the CIA, which is one of the reasons why we got involved, because for one thing, we knew about the genocide. It had been documented in the 60s to the mid 70s, 100,000 had been killed. And so we felt as Americans, it was incumbent upon us to look into it. If it was our CIA that was actually responsible for the genocide, we felt we had to report it. And so that's why we went down there to look at it. We didn't discover the Rockefeller connection until well after we'd made our visit in 76. We were in there and spent 6 months. We didn't find the Rockefeller connection until we came back to the States, because although we did find some very key links, and one of them was this Colonel J.C. King, who floated up and down the Amazon in his boat, collecting medicinal plants, and he was using anthropological students to do it. And it turns out some of the medicinal plants were actually later used in the MK Ultra CIA mind control experiments. Finding, and he worked very closely with Nelson Rockefeller, going way back when Nelson Rockefeller was coordinator of inter-American affairs under FDR. That's how Rockefeller got interested. Most people don't know that Rockefeller had this whole sort of hidden. I mean, it was certainly seemed to be hidden from the American people. Most people just thought of him as governor of New York and the vice president, but he had this huge hidden empire, both in the Amazon and throughout Latin America.
Yeah.
He made all sorts of contacts with military people and with corporate people. And he had a huge ranch down there as well.
In Brazil, yeah.
Yeah.
What was just for folks who may not understand, what got him down there in the first place officially, and what introduced you and your research to him that you said, oh wow, Rockefeller, what's he how did you make that connection?
Actually, the person who helped us make the connection was our literary agent. He at one point, we'd come back from our investigation. We're trying to find these links to the CIA if it was possible. And he said, you're going to find out who's really benefiting. Who are the Americans involved in this? And then he told us that the papers of Adolph Burley, who was Assistant Secretary of State, and this was again during this World War II period, that his papers had been declassified and they were at the FDR library. He said, you better go check it out. So we went to the FDR library. We got into his papers, which were just mind-boggling. I mean, because he worked very closely with Nelson. And that's where we found him giving reports to Nelson Rockefeller. And so we figured that we had found the top American that was interested in penetrating Latin America. Now, did you say that the person of this other book had found some connections to the whole JFK assassination? What was it? Well, I was curious because I haven't read that book. What was that about?
Yeah, William, you want to take that? Or
I mean, I think that he was just around. Nelson was very ambitious and connected to a lot of stuff. Definitely connected early on to kind of like the mind control stuff too. I think is what they found. But you can talk about that, James.
Well,
sure.
One of the things we found out is that, as I said, he had this shining dream, he called it, for the development of the Amazon. And I'll never forget, we did research in the Rockefeller archives. Great source of information, by the way, in New York. And when we got into the whole development of a central part of Brazil, it's called the Planis. Nelson had a huge idea, colonization and exploitation plans for it. Kennedy, at the time, wouldn't have it, and in fact blocked it, and that got the not only Nelson perturbed, but also David Rockefeller of Chase. You know, I mean, David Rockefeller's Chase Manhattan Bank was huge in developing much of Latin America. And I'll never forget that up until let's say the summer of 1963, we see these development plans going on that Nelson wanted that were in his papers, and then suddenly there's nothing. And the next thing we find, there's nothing on it. The next thing we find is there's a coup attempt. There is a successful coup against the president of Brazil, who was resisting development of the Amazon, Goulart. He was overthrown. And we do know that the CIA was involved in that, as was J.C. King, Nelson Rockefeller's cohort. And that once he was overthrown, that's when the invasion of the Amazon began in earnest after 1964. So you have the Kennedy assassination in 63, the coup in Brazil in 64. Another thing we found out is that Kennedy wanted to encourage government-to-government loans to the countries of Latin America. The big banks didn't like that. That bothered them. Anyway, there's a really good chapter in the book, and I should say that Jerry was by far the primary author of that edition of the book, and went into great detail. Some people say it's some of the best stuff on the Kennedy assassination, certainly in terms of background. But we didn't broadcast it that much. If people wanted to find it out, they could, and I still recommend it.
Absolutely.
What's your take on Nelson Rockefeller and Kennedy, the Kennedy assassination?
Well, it's just that. Oh, by the way, most people forget the fact that it was Nelson Rockefeller who wanted to be president at the time Kennedy was running. Little detail people forget.
I think he famously said, "I never wanted to be vice president of anything." Right?
Yeah.
I think
yeah. Well, that's true. So anyway, yeah. I mean, there was a rivalry between them, and Nelson did not want Kennedy to become president. That is clear. Nor did he become president, but that's another story.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also that connection between the Rockefeller clan and George de Mohrenschildt, who was Lee Oswald's handler in Dallas through a White Russian connection. And actually, there was just a comment posted here that mentions de Mohrenschildt. Baku oil field was sold to Rockefeller Standard Oil. Alan Dulles was friends with George de Mohrenschildt's dad, who ran the Baku oil field.
Oh, now did you get that out of that other book? I don't think you got that out of our book, did you?
No, this is a comment from somebody just listening on with us right now.
No kidding. Well,
they made the
that's
comment
interesting.
on Twitter. Yeah, Twitter X. That's true. De Mohrenschildt, White Russian, but when he came back, he was friends with Bouvier Kennedy. He was friends with her and lived in high style in that whole kind of Gilded Age kind of environment.
But is this Baku in Iraq? Baku oil field?
No, Baku is in the Caucasus. It's basically Azerbaijan or something like that.
Baku in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, I'll make a note of that. I'll look into that. That leads us into the Middle East. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, you have a connection there, right? To follow the pipelines, right?
Yeah, follow. All right. So yeah, like it just occurred to me with Thy Will Be Done, it was sort of follow the missionaries. And that is part of what people say our book is an anatomy of conquest. But in the process of spending so many years researching this, I had a pretty good idea about how oil companies operated. Plus, I'd been in the Middle East as a journalist. So the reason I got onto pipelines, particularly as they related to the Middle East, is because my father's last mission was to Saudi Arabia before he got on a plane to go to Ethiopia, and it crashed and killed all 6 people on board. And I never knew him, but when I later became a journalist, I started investigating.
What year
And
was that, Charlotte? What year did his
well,
plane go down?
when he died, 47. This is right after World War II. When I started looking into what had happened to him, that was starting in 75 when I was a journalist in Beirut. I started to sense that I was following his footsteps. And then as a sort of a refugee from the Civil War, I'd been shot at, and I decided that I didn't want to hang around there. This war made no sense to me. And so I went back to Winchester, Massachusetts, where my brother lived, and I was sort of regaling the family about all of my travels. I suddenly recalled that as a child, I had seen a steamer trunk in the attic. And it seemed to be something that had to do with my parents. So I went up to the attic, opened it up, and found all these scrapbooks in there. And there were letters home. I found my father's last report, and I found his last letter home. And that's when I learned that his trip to Saudi Arabia was extremely important. As I said, he was a spy. He was first recruited with the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which later became, by the time of his death, it was the Central Intelligence Group, which was the immediate precursor to the CIA. And so it was reading his last letters home, and his last report was fraught with huge implications. And his role was to determine what a safe route was for the pipeline. And I'm glad you have the cover of the book up there, because if you look at that, the dotted line that you'll see going up to Lebanon, that was the projected route of the Trans-Arabian Pipeline. But then you'll see 2 other sort of forked pipelines. And those were earlier pipelines that were built in the 30s, and they carried oil from Iraq. And the southernmost pipeline terminated in Haifa, which is now Haifa, Israel. And the northern terminated in Lebanon. And so I started to look into those earlier pipelines, thinking, well, they were built in the 30s, but when were they conceived? And then I eventually found out that it was in 1917. Well, first of all, I found out that for the Brits, getting the oil of Iraq was, quote unquote, a first class war aim. And the reason why it was so important for the Brits to get the oil of Iraq was because they had recently converted their whole fleet, their naval fleet, to oil as the fuel and replacing coal. Britain had lots of coal, but it didn't have any oil. So they had to go out and look for it. And even this was in 1911 when Churchill made the change, and he predicted he would have to fight on a sea of troubles. And so during World War I, a lot of the fighting, which most people don't pay much attention to, was to get rid of the Turks that control this whole area, the Ottoman Empire that you see on the cover of the book, and to get the Arabs to help them. This was Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, exactly.
And eventually to seize the oil of Iraq, which they did.
And the foundation of the Saudi Empire too took place.
Yeah, well, that comes as well, right? With regard to Iraq, I recently discovered finally that there Israeli investigators who've gotten into their archives, and they have found that having a pipeline terminate in Haifa, in a region controlled by European Jews, would be a good way to secure that oil. And so in 1917, we have the Balfour Declaration, which many people, have had it described as simply that the British government favored the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Okay. You seldom hear the details of that Balfour Declaration. Actually, all it was a letter. And the person who sent it was Lord Balfour, who was the former foreign officer of Britain, who well knew Britain's need to have an outlet for oil. He knew this very well. And it was written to Lord Walter de Rothschild, who was the scion of the great banking, one of them, banking and oil fortunes in Europe. And so this puts the Balfour Declaration in a whole new light. And I mean, if you really probe into all the problems that are existing in Gaza and, the war that's going on right now, you will begin to see a realization that the development of a state of Israel, beginning with a Jewish homeland, it was a colonial project. Some people would call it a colonial settler state, much like what the United States was, a colonial settler state. In both cases, it was the British that set them up. And I even had a Jewish friend, an author, who had read my book and said, wow, this suddenly makes sense. I always wondered why the British cared so much about the Jews and protecting the Jews, because they were incredibly anti-Semitic. And now this is beginning to make sense. And I would imagine it's very painful for Jews, both in the United States and certainly in Israel, to start looking at Israel as this kind of a construct, But if we fast forward, here's another insight. My father in 1943, right before he was sent over to Lebanon, he wrote a analysis of work, which was sort of a regurgitation of what his marching orders were. And it was very heavily redacted, but there's this one great line that missed the redactor's pen. He said, the primary interest of the U.S. at this time, and for him, was, quote unquote, to protect the oil at all costs. Now we're in World War II, and it's the oil of Saudi Arabia that they want to protect. It had been discovered in the late 30s, but it was being developed at this very time when my father was sent over to Lebanon. And what did he mean? Protect it at all costs. Because oil has no value when it's just sitting in the ground. You got to distribute it, right? But how do you distribute it? There are two ways. You can use tankers or you can use pipelines. But pipelines are crucial. In fact, a contemporary of my father called them arteries of empire. And what I learned is that the Trans-Arabian pipeline, that dotted line that you see, the Trans-Arabian pipeline elevated the United States into a world power, not only in the Middle East, but in the entire world. It was crucial to the development of the Marshall Plan, and it converting Europe to oil and away, and in their industries and in everything, away from coal, which was heavily dominated by communist coal unions. The whole idea was to convert Europe into its dependence on Saudi oil, and it was very successful. Then what I found out is that protect the oil at all costs, and that means militarily. is a meme that's continued all the way up to the present.
No
And
question. Some of
now,
this war in Gaza
yeah,
and Lebanon involves oil rights or gas rights off the coast of
correct.
Gaza and things like that. So
Off the coast.
it's
Well,
still
that's
a
absolutely, it's
component. Yeah.
critical. It's absolutely critical. And because, well, first of all, it was first discovered in 2000. At the time, Arafat, the head of the PLO, thought, "Oh my God, this is a gift of God. Finally, the Palestinians will be able to have their own economic well-being. They can develop the offshore gas, oil and gas." But the well, Netanyahu, who was finance minister, and his right-wing Likud party were determined that the Palestinians would not get access to that oil and gas. Their arguments were that the proceeds would not trickle down to the Palestinian people, that instead they would be used to support terrorism. So there were two invasions prior to the whole, post October 7th, recent 2023 huge invasion of Gaza. There were two previous ones. One was in 2009 and the other was in 2014. And the whole idea was to keep it out of the hands of the Palestinians. And that's documented in my book. So now what we're looking at is the complete devastation of Gaza, the de-radicalization, the depopulation, the total flattening of Gaza. And the end game is to run an energy corridor right up that coast. You see there's Palestine, it's now Israel. Then you see Lebanon to the north. What's happening in Lebanon now? Now they're going after Lebanon.
Yeah.
And look what's happened right to the north of that is Syria. And now there's fighting in Syria. I don't see this as an accident. I see it as a long range plan. And people may wonder why the Biden administration, for instance, kept arming Israel. People are saying, why would he do that? Why would Joe Biden risk having a legacy of being Genocide Joe? And my answer is because there are long-term plans. They involve the Saudis. It's the expansion of the Abraham Accords that actually were started by Trump, but and Biden decided to continue them. And the whole idea is to develop the area, right? But because the Palestinians caught on to it and it seemed that there was no role for them, they felt there was no recourse other than fighting back. And that's when they launched their plan that assaulted Israel and killed 1,200 people. And the full story of that has yet to come out. But there's very clear evidence that Netanyahu knew about it in advance. He had warnings. He had warnings, I think a month before. The Egyptians warned him that something was afoot. And even the day before, there was a woman manning the security there. And the security around Gaza is so intense. So, a butterfly can land on a wire and it'll trigger something. So how could it be that this massive breaching of the security happened? And they went in there. The Hamas went in there. So there are many who believe that that Netanyahu let it happen. And because he let it happen, he now had the perfect pretext to do the grand invasion, destroy the Palestinians once and for all, and keep going north to achieve this great economic development scheme. Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, was told a group of people at Harvard University a few months ago that Gaza would make great waterfront property.
Yeah, they've already purchased, some of the generals have already purchased land in Gaza, is my understanding. And a lot of that information comes from the Israeli media, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
it
Times
does.
of Israel, the stuff stand down. They've caught Ben Gavir adjusting data from 10/7. He was a henchman of Netanyahu. So there's a lot of problems. And the real thing is that people who aren't Israeli may not know this. They are primed for response under any circumstance. So they can put an Apache in the sky or a plane in the sky in 5 minutes. So why is this the 6-hour stand down order or anything like that? And a lot of those deaths that happen on 10/7 were not done by small arms fire with guys in Toyotas. It was done by
Well,
heavy weaponry and Hellfire missiles and tanks.
yeah, there's a lot coming out on that too. There was, I forgot what the plan was called, but
Well, there's the Hannibal option, which is
the
one of the
Hannibal,
things.
that's it. The
Yeah.
Hannibal option, which is
You
fire
don't
on your
take,
own
yeah.
people.
They have hostages
Prevent them,
issues there. Yeah, they have
yeah,
hostages.
to prevent them from becoming hostages, you got to fire on your own people. Let's come out. So we don't know. The part that my understanding was that the aim was to go after military targets, but the music festival. Look at that. What's that? They moved the closer to Gaza. Well, that's interesting. Oh, I'll have to learn more about that. That is the part that I find very troubling.
Those aren't not Yahoo voters either, too. So
yeah. Well,
thing.
actually, a lot of those people were peaceniks.
Exactly.
And of course, Netanyahu is avoiding all efforts to do an investigation, and let alone release of the hostages. I mean, what does he care about the hostages? He's got a long range vision, and of course, he's trying to stay out of jail, just like Trump apparently successfully has done so. Whether Netanyahu will achieve the same end, I don't know, but they're working hand in glove right now. So I fear for things are going to get a lot worse there.
Well,
I don't know how it's going to end. It's so sad.
Charlotte, if I can jump in based on that,
Sure.
with the incoming administration, and it appears Kushner is maybe off the public profile versus his role, obviously, with the Abraham Accords in the first administration. But where are you? What are you seeing in terms of this incoming administration, in terms of possibly its relationship in the Middle East? I know you've laid out already it. So far, I can kind of see where you're going, but just what other concerns are you seeing in general? Because I'm sure you've thought about it.
Well, let's look at Lebanon, for instance. I've been in touch with some Lebanese that I know, and they say this ceasefire. I'm doubtful it'll hold, but maybe it will. And the terms of the ceasefire essentially means that Lebanon has lost all sovereignty over its land. Israel is going to have the right to intervene at any time that it suspects that there's some kind of armed, movement of arms or whatever. But because they have the ability, they have artificial intelligence, they've got very advanced surveillance mechanisms. The feeling is that Lebanon is defenseless, and the people of Lebanon are sick of it. They had a civil war, for heaven's sakes, that lasted 15 years and killed 100,000 people. And what was the end result of that civil war? The purpose of it, one of them, was to get the Palestinians out. The PLO, get them removed from Lebanon. Okay, so that happened. Then what happened is Israel made some incursions. One was in 82, and another one was in 2006. And especially by 2006, the Lebanese government was so weak it didn't fight it. And who fought it? It was Hamas. They had between 82 and 206, they started arming themselves because no one would fight the Israelis, but the Hamas did. And by doing that, they won a lot of support by the Shiite Muslims who are mostly in the southern part of Lebanon. And at this point, you know, the Lebanese, I think they're all sick of being their economy is destroyed. You know, their port was destroyed. It blew up.
That's right.
There's never been a proper accountability as to who or what was responsible. But you can guess what some people are thinking. But at any rate, and I was told that Israel is going to take over the control of the port and the airport. So all the Lebanese people want to do is the average Lebanese, they just want to stop the fighting so they can live their lives. Now, what's going to happen to the Palestinians? I mean, God help them. There's massive ethnic cleansing. And where are they going to end up? In the Sinai somewhere? I mean, it's like the Nakba of 1948 all over, only much worse. It's just a horrendous tragedy.
Yeah, according to Nader, the death counts are undercounted anyway, so it's in the hundreds.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are still under the rubble.
Yeah, so
Oh, it's just.
And the Israelis are talking about
disgusting.
going all the way to that river. What's the river?
Or the Litani River.
Yeah, Litani, yeah.
Yeah, that's in southern Lebanon.
So they're just.
But I think they want to go farther than that. I'm convinced. You know, it's this whole energy corridor, and why do they want to develop it now? This is because guess what? It's because of the war in Ukraine. Okay, you want to talk about pipelines? You may remember that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was sabotaged. That was a pipeline carrying Russian oil and gas to Germany, and then it would be distributed to Europe. And Europe has long relied on cheap Russian gas for its industries and oil for, you know, its military and so on. And with the sabotage of that pipeline, Europe was no longer going to get Russian energy, and that was another thing I learned, that it's the bypass. There were pipelines developed that would bypass Russian controlled territories. I mean, it's all competition. It's the great game, as I call it, the great game for oil and gas. And here, the Russians were my father's major concern way back in the 40s. In fact, I have this wonderful article, March 2, 1947. It says pipeline for U.S. adds to Middle East issues. Oil concessions raise questions involving position of Russia. So it's been going on, you know, for 70 years. The competition with the Russians.
Right. When was he in the Middle East? When did he start? I mean, the plane went down.
Well, he was first there in the early 30s. He had majored in European history at Harvard, and then after graduation, he was sent to Beirut to teach students from all over the Middle East at the American University of Beirut. I suspect that my grandmother had some role in that. She'd been a missionary in Turkey, by the way. I didn't even know she was a missionary. Wow. To find that out, she was a modernist missionary, and she taught biology to Armenian students in Turkey. That's a whole nother story. But at any rate, I think that because of that connection, it was decided that my father should be sent to Beirut because America envisioned itself as a rising oil power in the region. And Beirut was like the most sophisticated country in the Middle East.
Didn't they call it Paris by the Sea or something?
The Paris of the Middle East.
It was amazing. Paris before the Civil War. It was beautiful, yeah.
Oh, it was gorgeous. When I was there, it was wonderful. And the French controlled Lebanon after World War I. They had a French mandate there, and there's still, you know, there's a strong French influence. But anyway, it was the most cosmopolitan country in the region, and so
almost kind of like Casablanca. A lot of intel people loitering around. Kim Philby, St. John Philby, actually. I was wondering,
Philby.
Philby.
The Philbys, they are in my story, definitely, because Kim Philby, the most famous spy of the 20th century, he was a double agent. He was a traitor to the British. You know,
Cambridge 5, yeah. Cambridge 5.
he spied for them, but meanwhile, his loyalties were with the Soviets, and he was my father's direct counterpart. When my father was in Lebanon in charge of counterintelligence for the Americans, Philby was in Turkey in charge of counterintelligence for the British, but he was also spying for the Russians.
Wow.
So, yeah, I dug into that relationship. And his father was an advisor to Ibn Saud.
He was
Mm-hmm.
more than an advisor. He was a close personal friend and shared his harem. So he went native. His dad
Yeah,
went fully
he
native.
did
Yeah.
go native. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I commend you for your knowledge on this.
Done a
You
lot
know,
of different shows. I know kind of my Middle Eastern history. I'm pretty good about it. But
yeah,
you're really the great game is still taking place. All of this
it's
people and
it's
there's
on
just an innocent
steroids.
families and little kids are in the middle of it, you know.
Oh my God.
People are just
It's
moving
just
little pieces on a risk board. They don't care who dies in Ukraine. They depopulated Ukraine. They're going to
it's
depopulate Gaza. It's really something else.
horrible. I was told at one point by an oil company insider. He said to me, they don't they don't care what they do. In other words, they can conquer, they can assassinate, they can do regime change, they can do war. They'll do anything it takes to get the oil. And the reason is because they're all competing. You know, they're competing on a world stage. Even though we're trying to get off of fossil fuels, they're still out there doing it because they can. That's the point. They feel they can get away with it, and they're hugely powerful. And Trump is very beholden to oil, especially the fracking, the independents who made a lot of money through fracking and have done very well since the war in Ukraine.
Mm. That's
They've been
that's
shipping
a
their
very
natural
prescient,
gas up. Yeah.
Charlotte. That's a very prescient comment about the fracking, and I'm reminded. I saw this behind the scenes video of the people around him watching Vice President Harris's speech to her supporters a few days after the election, and they were making notes, and he's making comments that were being posted on Twitter, and there's a lot of activity. And he said, "Has she mentioned fracking? Has she mentioned fracking?" You know, he really wanted to know if that was brought up. So you saying that is just kind of a clue that maybe that is more important than we think.
Well, oh yeah, I mean, also because Pennsylvania was where a lot of this new technology was developed, even though it's proven to be quite dangerous, right? I think it's banned in New York. I could be wrong, but in Pennsylvania, it's still. And Pennsylvania was one of the swing states, so I mean, it was sad. It's quite sad. I'm sure she felt that. What was she going to do? Say ban fracking when so many livelihoods in Pennsylvania depended on it. So she said, no, I'm not against fracking. She had to change her line. She was caught in a bind. She was so harnessed. I was sad to see that she didn't win. Would have been nice to have a woman as president, and I thought she was pretty sharp, all things considered. But anyway, yeah, so we're off to a tragedy, and with with Trump and Netanyahu working hand in glove, I see the genocide continuing, and then in comes the development. The Saudis are going to develop the area, and they somehow think that this is going to solve the problem, whereas they've only created a whole new generation of jihadists.
Right.
And
Not
by the
just
way, I might add,
Palestinians. Yeah, not just
pardon me.
Palestinians.
No, not just Palestinian. By the way, um, why are these all Islamists? Some people wonder why are the all these sort of evangelicals, right? And the fact of the matter is, especially like when I was in Lebanon, which there was a lot of secular Palestinian resistance movements in Lebanon. And what happened is they were murdered. They got rid of the seculars. And so the people, who did they turn to? They turned to these, Islamist forces that were going to fight for them. And that's pretty much the situation we have today. There's not much secular resistance. They exist, but they're not powerful. And that's how it happened. So we're not looking for, we're not, I don't perceive a happy time.
Has
My dog is barking for some reason. I don't know why.
Real quick, Charlotte, as in terms of the evangelical movement, has Christian identity been something that has come along your way? The idea of like British Israelism, the notion of, the theological notion that, Jesus wasn't a Jew, but he was white, and therefore, we have a white supremacy over folks. And it seems to me, for instance, my point is, for Trump supporters, that a lot of the January 6th people were Christian identity people, the Christian nationalism. I'm just wondering if any of this has come across your radar at all. I'd love to hear.
Christian nationalism, definitely. I mean, just they're used right now. I mean, look who's going to be the ambassador to Israel. Christian nationalists, and they have allied Christian Zionism, it's called. Yeah. I mean,
he's an evangelical, right? What's his name?
It is. I mean, here it is again. Huckabee. Yeah. They're happy to be used. They're happy to be used because they've gotten more support. There's financial support of them, and they will ally with the Jews. Of course, they think that ultimately they're going to be the ones that are going to be saved.
Right. There's no real Palestine. I think that's what Huckabee said. Like, there's no Palestinian state. There's no Palestinians. This is blah.
Yeah.
Like,
so
he
that's
came
what
right out.
To.
His policies, he came right out and said it without shame. Like, just like, whoa. So we see what's coming on. There's not going to be any resistance. So the Palestinians are just it's terrible. They're between a hammer and an anvil, really.
Well, they are, and the Lebanese are now, and they're not all one sex. I mean, they're Christian Lebanese and Sunni and Shiite, and there's Druze. I mean, there's a number of.
There's a lot of Arab Christians in Gaza that got killed. There's like that's a famous, like, at the road to Emmaus, or where Christ after his resurrection is there. There was a famous church. They just blew the living daylights out. They don't want to show that in the U.S., of course. So all the assets here don't want to.
And by the way, Syria, who are these rebels? If you watch the media, it's these rebels are going up against Assad. Okay, Assad is. There are many people who do not like him, obviously, and they think he runs a dictatorship and so on. But one of the things I learned is that it was the West that supported the insurgency, which started as real back in 2011, but then pretty soon the West was in there, and Qatar got in there, and their aim is to overthrow Assad. And the only reason that Assad has survived is because he's got support from the Russians. But now, and my latest reading is that these rebels are asking for help from Israel, which does not surprise me one bit. And this is the mainstream media that I read this report. In fact, it was the Times of Israel, if I'm not wrong, that said that the rebels are calling on Israel to support them, which, of course, that just fits into the whole idea of the greater Israel and developing this energy corridor. So we'll see what happens. They're hitting Syria when it's very vulnerable, because the Iranians are tied down, and Hezbollah and Hamas have been very severely diminished. So it was a good time to attack, and we'll just have to wait and see whether the Russians will come in big time behind Assad again to save his regime. So it's just escalation, and this is escalation involving nuclear powers. That's why it's so disturbing. And whoever talks about how many nuclear weapons the Israelis have?
Not the mainstream media, the alternate media,
No.
the stuff I listen to, they're terrified. They're like, we're right at the edge of nuclear war. So
Well,
smart analysts too.
It is serious.
Yeah.
Very serious.
When you okay the bombing inside of Russia with American-made missiles, it's never a good idea. Like, it's totally stupid and insane. Like, this current administration is beyond brinkmanship. It's crazy. They're lunatics. It's great they chose to bomb inside Russia, and then Harris goes to Hawaii for a vacation. It's unbelievable. We are at the hour mark. Why don't James? Where can people find your work? And that you wrote that article about Sensio on Medium, right? JFK or Rockefeller conspiracy.
Yeah, just jamesfday.medium.com. A lot of JFK stuff on there, and I profile Richard's book on the Clash of Dynasties on Rockefeller and his tentacles in South America.
And we've done shows on the Shroud of Turin recently, on the Mad Bishops, and you have a couple other books too, right? One on the Sistine Chapel, is that right?
Yeah, Michelangelo, and Benedict XVI, the Pope who resigned a few years ago.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then Charlotte, how about you? Where can people find your work? And
they can find it on Amazon. I mean, that's the easiest. My publisher is Chelsea Green, but in your local bookstore, that's how you get it.
Gotcha. Get the book. And do you have social media or website, or how can people reach out
at
to you?
charlottedennett.com and also followthepipelines.com. I am in the process of updating that. But yeah, in fact, we're trying to get other pipeline trackers to share their analysis. So in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be devoting a lot of time to that. But there's still a lot on that. Followthepipelines.com.
Great. I will put links to your website, and I will put links to James Day's Medium as well, so people can check that out. But thanks so much.
You.
Yeah, thanks for both of your time. Again, James Day and Charlotte Dennett.
Appreciate it. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. Stay there.